Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and today we have our debate. We have our world famous debaters, Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, and Professor Donald. I think Mr. Marshall also joined with us. He already informed me that he will join soon. So I want to give chance to our honorable Prime Minister of the Parliament, Mr. Rob.
Thank you, and good morning. This House believes AI is likely the best to happen to humanity. I want to focus on the word likely. With any technology, there is a positive and there's a negative. Nuclear energy can do amazing things to generate power. It can also represent us, and certainly initially did represent a significant threat to the planet. And we were reminded this week of that when the Ukrainian nuclear power plant was attacked by the Russians and burst into flames. That's stabilized now, but it does again showcase that almost any technology can be used for good or ill. Artificial intelligence is spreading throughout the world, and it's being used for decision support, simulation, and assuring the accuracy of decisions. So what we need to do is we need to focus on changing the word likely to will, at least in this country. Having artificial intelligences that are doing harm, being installed in weapon systems, we can't stop that. We might want to join the consortium of countries that are trying to outlaw the use of artificial intelligence in weapon systems, but personally, I'm not convinced that will be successful, because its weapon systems are going to get developed, and not everybody will join the consortium. So the focus shouldn't be de-emphasized, but by the nature of the fact we're a small country and we do not control the rest of the world, we cannot assure them, but we can assure ourselves. The kinds of things we would like to use AI for is decision support. We saw, as an example, when the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, a few months later, it was discovered that the reason the military failed in the country was because the prior administration had removed all the electronic support for it, and the modern U.S. Army, and by nature of helping the Afghanistan Army, was largely driven by technology. And when that support came out, they lost the ability to direct, to support their equipment, and to properly deploy, and it fell apart rapidly. And we knew that, they knew that 2 months after it happened. It would have been far better if they'd known it before they made the decision to withdraw. That was clearly both an information completeness problem and an information bias problem. The administration had reached a decision to deploy to remove the U.S. operations before they even had access to the data. They'd been denied access during the transition period, and clearly had not been in long enough to understand what was going on the ground, and they failed catastrophically. A properly configured and supported AI could at least provided them with a stronger counterpoint that what they were doing was going to happen badly, was going to result in a catastrophe. With regard to simulation, we're seeing that happen in the Ukraine. By now, we all know that Russia going into the Ukraine is going to be catastrophic for Russia. Had they run a simulation ahead of time using an AI to assure that the simulation was accurate, they would have discovered that they were nowhere near ready to go into Ukraine, that their false information on the Nazis in Ukraine was not going to be strong enough to drive world opinion, and that the economic damage to Russia would be unsustainable. And now, of course, we see that people making the decision are at high risk with relatively large bounties on their heads. And neither one of us, neither parties, ever wants to be in that kind of a situation where people are putting up millions of dollars basically to remove or kill us. Looking at parts of the country that are having difficulty, our population doesn't trust the police, doesn't trust the judicial system, largely because there's substantial evidence of graft and corruption. The way to get rid of graft and corruption is first better assure that the judicial system is making decisions based on the law, not based on anything that's coming into them illicitly. Same thing with the police. make sure that their performance is happening the way it should and not happening because they are receiving bribes, they're inadequately trained or inadequately provisioned. A properly implemented AI can showcase both the problem and help us find a better financial solution than what we're having. These decisions being made by gut are doing us a substantial amount of substantial amount of harm, sorry. And using conversational AI, we can better connect with our citizens, and they can better connect with the services that we have available to them. I don't know if you've ever called into one of our helplines, but going through the decision tree on an IVR, an interactive voice response system, is both annoying and once again, don't know about the rest of you, but actually it makes me angry. It's why should I spend 30 minutes just to get to the answer that I need, when simple web systems can get it to me much more quickly, except those web systems don't connect to the data that I need. So I have to call in and get a robot that is poorly trained and poorly provisioned and anything but an AI to try to get me to where I want to go. And all it does is drive me around in circles. And that doesn't do any good for either party. Both of us have to make better connections with our constituents and better understand their needs. And more important, when we pass laws and put in place support structures, help them get to those support structures. We've got problems with mental health. We've got problems with unemployment. We've got problems with getting people the medication they need during the pandemic. We need to be better at logistics. We need to be better at access. We need to be better at making decisions that help our population, and proper analytics, accurate data, the removal of bias, and implementing an AI that's designed to help our people could help us do that. Medical, we're in a pandemic, still in a pandemic, though it's on the downside. We had huge problems getting people to the vaccines and even convincing people that they should take the vaccines. Practices like masks, we were all over the map with regard to masks. Following the US CDC did us almost no good because they couldn't even make up their mind about whether masks were good or bad at the beginning, let alone later on when it was unclear whether masks helped education or hurt it. Proper analytics would give us the answers and provide us with a better path that would assure the outcome. Neither party had a good foundation here. We did separate on the underlying concept, and I get the need for politics and to accuse the people in power and imply that you can do a better job, but without proper analytics, you can't. Everybody in position did the best job they could with the information they had, and we need to get them better information and recognize that a lot of the people that we appoint to positions in office lack the skills, at least initially, to do those jobs. It's just the nature of politics. If we can provide them with that help with a well-formed and intelligent AI, at least they will be better informed as they make those decisions. And the ramp up as we change from one administration to another will be far less painful. For the most part, though, why I propose that AI is the best to happen to humanity is it does three things if implemented properly. It allows us to do simulations so we can see the impact of our decisions in the virtual world before it impacts the real world. It can help us eliminate bias. So we're making decisions for the best of our citizens as opposed to according to some political ideology. And finally, it can help provide transparency to our citizens to let them know that we're acting in their best interest and not in our own, which is the purpose of government. We have to be able to act in their best interest instead of our own. So I go back to how I started. We have to remove the word likely. AI is coming. We're not going to stop it. Nobody can. But we need to turn the concept of AI likely being better for humanity to being an absolute, that AI will be better for humanity and particularly better for our citizens.
Thank you for today's Parliament, Honorable Prime Ministers, Professor Rob. Now I request from the opposition side, our opposition's leader, Professor David Smith.
So the majority believes that AI is the best thing to happen to humanity. And a couple of the arguments are is that it will eliminate bias, but bias is innately part of one of the challenges with AI, and that it will be transparent. But on the other hand, we're trusting our future under their leadership to a black box approach using AI and moving part of it. While science fiction often portrays AI as robots with human-like characteristics, it can be anything from Google search algorithms to uh, advanced systems like IBM Watson was to be to autonomous weapons. And AI is used in all of those different types of elements. You know, while most of our AI today is weak AI, that's designed to perform a very narrow task, like maybe facial recognition or only driving a car. The long-term goal is to create a general AI. Uh, while narrow AI might outperform humans at a task like playing chess, really general AI would outperform human at almost every cognitive task. And it could be the best thing or the worst thing that ever happened to mankind. And this is a question that has existed since the 1940s, when one of the leading computer scientists, time Turing, wondered and began to believe that there would be a time machines would have an unlimited impact on humanity. And he offered really quotes to us back then to say, fear what that could be and where it is. Oxford University professor Nick Bostrom wrote a New York Times bestseller, Superintelligence. It was published in 2014. It struck a nerve in everyone, though. He says progress has been very rapid in artificial intelligence machines, and it's the public discourse. In his book, he talked about it being like AI being like children playing with a bomb that can go off at any time. And as we've seen AI with the fact that Google created an artificial intelligence system that began to learn on its own, and it began to turn and take the dark side of artificial intelligence, and Google had to turn it off. Great example of some of those. Bostrom in his book also said there's a mismatch between levels of maturity and our wisdom, our ability to cooperate as a species. On the other hand, what he sees today is the impacts of artificial intelligence could be even worse. That they could do things, political, legal, social ramifications. Rather than avoid it, we should put ourselves in a position where we will not allow it to control ourselves. So if AI is coming, like Rob said it's coming, we really need to look at ways to limit it to the places where it can be used and not let it become its own creature. Many of you know I've spent a lot of time in Austin, Texas, and an innovation judge at South by Southwest. Year before last, at the South by Southwest conference, uh, Tesla and SpaceX founder Elon Musk issued a friendly warning. He said, and this was great, I was at this talk, mark my words, AI is far more dangerous than nukes. No shrinking valley, especially when it comes to talking about opinion. He really talked about how it really is. He told us in the speech, I'm really quite close to the cutting edge in AI, and it scares the hell out of me. It's capable of vastly more than almost anyone knows, and the rate of performance is really exponential. And he went on to talk about his fears of where AI is going and that it has to be tremendously controlled. Stephen Hawkins, one of the best late physicists of our time, he told an audience in Portugal that AI's impact could be cataclysmic unless its rapid development is strictly and ethically controlled. He said, unless we learn how to prepare for and avoid the potential risk, AI could be the worst event in the history of our civilization. Uh, you know, I'm giving you some of the dark sides, but in case I haven't driven home the point quite firmly enough, research fellow Stuart Armstrong from the Future of Life Institute has spoken of AI as an extinction risk if it were ever to go rogue. Even nuclear war, he says, on a different level of discussion. Wise, because it only kill a relatively small population of the planet. Same with pandemics. Uh, but he says AI could be much worse. Cognitive scientist and author Gary Marcus offered details that the smarter machines become, the more their goals can shift. Once computers can effectively reprogram themselves and improve themselves, leading to somewhat the term singularity or intelligent explosion, the risk of machines outwitting humans in battles for resources and self-preservation cannot be simply dismissed. I have another 4 pages of quotes from scientists, from politicians, from industry leaders that I could go on and on with about the risk of really general artificial intelligence. Uh, can it do good things? Yes, it can do good things. But whether it can be, as the majority house says, it's likely to be the best thing that ever happened to humanity, we have to take that with a grain of salt. Is it a tool? Yes, it's a tool. It's a tool just like our tractors have helped us feed our citizens more. It's a tool just like we've been able to harness water, we've been able to harness steam and heat to generate electricity for our citizens. It's a tool just like we've been able to turn trees into paper and take paper to educate our citizens and inform our citizens. They're all tools. But it's one that we have to be very careful with and put constraints around it as we go forward. Is it part? Yes. Is the best thing? I think we should heal the warning of some of the most brilliant scientists that we've had in the last hundreds of years and say it's there, but it really needs to be controlled. Is it good? Yes. But is it just another tool? Yes. It's not the best thing that's happened to us, though. And as we become a, a, a world that is beginning to look at branching out to other planets and other galaxies on the way, it's really the human spirit and our ability to think and reason and innovate that is really important. The U.S. Patent Office just issued an opinion that artificial intelligence ideas cannot be patented. Part of the reasoning is AI is just an extension of human innovation, and that the humans can hold the patent. But on the other hand, if AI can learn so much that it supplements human intelligence, supplements human control, that we'll be in problem. And we need to make sure we control it to the level that it does not reach that state. So thank you so much for allowing me to put our position out on the table. And I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate.
Thank you, opposition leader of the parliament. Now I request our Minister of Technology, Mr. Marshall.
Well, thank you, Sharif, and our Honorable Prime Minister and fellow members of the Parliament. I want to take up the issues that David brought up. They're good issues. They, especially in today's environment, one can think that great harm can come from this type of technology, from all technologies, as a matter of fact. In fact, at the end of World War II, what closed out World War II was the use of the atomic weapons that were developed by the United States to bring a very difficult war to an end. The Nazis had already been defeated in Europe, but the Japanese had continued to fight on and were prepared to fight to the last person. When you have that kind of determination by a population, or you're led by fanatical people or fanatics of all kinds, kind of like what we're seeing currently in the Ukraine, in the attack on the Ukraine, then yes, technology can be a negative consequence. Technology has a negative consequence in regular war without nuclear weapons. So people die. We know that. But we also know that technology can be used to save people's lives, just as much as it can be used for a negative sense. Our proposition in the government, and as the head of the technology ministry, Our proposition is that technology can be used for good and should be used for good. It needs to be regulated. There's no doubt about it. But we also, it's like anything else in life. Everything that you use, whether it's a plow or a horse or a car, you all need regulations, and you have different degrees of risk associated with them. So the honorable opposition, my fellow minister in the government, or well, he's not in the government, in the opposition, head of the opposition, has articulated that the risk is too great, and one needs to be cautious. One always needs to be cautious. If you're not cautious, then you're not human, in my opinion. In our country, we are not going to be invaded. We're not a dictatorship. We have a parliamentary democracy. And under the parliamentary democracy rules, we have rules of the road in which we can regulate technologies and make it to the benefit of not just ourselves, but all of humankind. It's like anything else in life. If you eat too much, you gain too much weight. If you gain too much weight, you might end up with a heart condition. So what are we going to tell people not to eat too much? How do you do that? So I don't think you can stop innovation and technology from coming forth. I think we live in a democracy, and we know that artificial intelligence has the capability to improve humanity's standard of living and capabilities just as much as it might be able to be used as a weapon. You could use a rock as a weapon, let alone a gun, or let alone a nuclear device, or even a nuclear power plant. It's all dependent on people, not so much the technology. So I think to point out that AI is harmful is like saying everything is harmful in the world. Don't do anything. Just stay static. Don't get out of bed in the morning. In fact, you'll starve to death. You'll become limp. You won't be able to walk. Don't take a hike. You might fall down on the hike and break your leg. And then what? You might be abandoned. I think these arguments are facetious at the most. And I think what we need to do is we need to take, from the government's point of view, is we responsibly promote technology. We use it in many ways. One of the projects we're working on for our government is to take waste, which is common everywhere in the world, and convert it into a feedstock to lower environmental impacts in our country and also in our neighbors and around the world, those who will benefit from it. So not everybody's going to benefit from it. Not everybody's going to be able to take advantage of it. Could it be dangerous? Not likely, because you're taking something that is considered dangerous, a toxin, and you're going to convert it into something that will actually lower the carbon footprint, improve soil health in our country, improve water quality, reduce GHG emissions. That's an example of being able to do that. And we use artificial intelligence to do that. So what are we going to do? Remove artificial intelligence so we can't do that? Doesn't make sense to me. Does it make sense to our citizens? I don't think so. So I believe our government is going to make a strong proposition that, yes, we need to regulate these tools, but we're going to use them for the benefit of mankind and the benefit of our citizens. And I leave it at that.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of the Parliament. Now I request opposition member of the Parliament, Professor Donald.
Well, it's fascinating that even though Marshall basically changed the subject and started talking about something entirely different, he made a very good argument for what we're saying. He started out and went through basically explaining why AI is not probably one of the best things that's coming, and he basically supported David's argument that it's a tool that we need to use and regulate. I really agreed with almost everything that David said, and I think he laid out an argument that's very solid. I want to emphasize the aspect that AI is a tool. I personally don't think that. What I want to say is that we're a small country, and we have to set priorities about what we want to do and think to ourselves, what is it that we can accomplish? How can we accomplish it? We're not in the position to start working on things that aren't going to happen for hundreds of years, because we don't really know all the things that are going to happen in hundreds of years. In 1900, I don't think there's that many people that imagined cell phones, or the internet, or many of the things that we live with today just weren't even conceived of. I mean, it was Vannevar Bush in the 40s that first conceived of something that was like the internet. So it's not even, and so 100 years from now or 200 years from now, we can't even really guess what technology is going to wind up happening. And the reason I say that is because the idea of general AI I think that where that comes from is that computer scientists and physicists and other kinds of people are just simply not trained in sociology and some of the things, and they don't really understand how complex human society is. They make these assumptions that knowledge is something that's independent of our society. And I mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it again, which is that the words that we use have their meaning is derived from the particular interaction that's going. And what does it mean to interact with a computer? What are their goals? How would we train a computer to actually have desires and wants and emotions and all the kinds of things that drive us? People argue that computers would be better because they don't have emotions, but without emotions, they don't have desires. They don't want to do anything. Why would a computer want to do anything? They don't have problems. Why would a computer have a problem? I mean, if the computer crashes, whose problem is that? Is it the computer's? No, it's our problem. So I am a very large supporter of the idea that AI is a valuable tool. I'm not arguing in any way that we shouldn't use AI or that there's a problem with using AI. And I didn't hear David argue that either. The opposition's been very clear that we think AI is a very valuable tool. It's a useful tool. I think Rob laid it out in very good ways that we can use it for simulation. We can use it for all kinds of data analysis. And I think that Rob pointed out that what they do is only as good as the data that they get. And so, at least for the foreseeable future, the whole idea of the intelligence system that's being developed at Google is intelligence is the ability to detect bias data so that the data is less biased. It's nothing like it's all of a sudden learning how to play Go on its own. And the whole idea of general intelligence, I mean, why would you want a computer that's doing analysis on errors in cars that you're building to be able to play Go at the same time? I mean, what use is it? And while we read there's worries about, this is the part I kind of want to augment what David said in a kind of a different way, is that certainly great scientists like Stephen Hawking and great science fiction writers like Werner Vinge and Vinge and brilliant entrepreneurs like Ray Kurzweil all have talked about the idea that there's going to be a singularity where the computers get so incredibly smart that they'll be able to start programming themselves, and then they can program computers that are. But I want you to notice, none of these guys are social scientists. They're not psychologists. They're not sociologists. They're not social psychologists. So they're very, very good and very, very expert in their fields. But just because somebody's expert in one field doesn't make them, it doesn't transfer into other fields. So we have to really take what they're saying with a grain of salt, because it's clear to me as a social scientist that they simply don't even know what knowledge is. And so I don't think that we have to worry about that happening. So it goes back to what I'm saying, and I'm emphasizing the best thing, the best in the statement, which is it the best thing that's happening? It's a good thing that's happening. It's a new tool that we have, but and the like vaccines is it really better than vaccines? I mean, just think of all the lives. Is it better than antibiotics? Is it better than farming methods, which are going to be able to feed the world as the population grows and the climate changes? I mean, all of those things are extremely good and extremely important. They provide value to us. Can AI help with those things? Yes, it can, but it's not the cause, because it's our human problems, our human desires, our human needs are what's going to drive it. And AI can help us solve the real problems. But I don't see how we could possibly say it's the best thing. So there.
Thank you, Professor Donalds. Now I request our opposition leaders of the Parliament, Professor David Smith, for rebuttals and closing remarks. So you can take around 7 + 2, 9 minutes for your speech.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time, with the fact that the majority has made many of the arguments for us. I hope to even be briefer than that. Nick Bronstom, which I referenced before, he said the biggest threat is the longer term problem introducing something radical, that's super intelligence, and failing to align it with human values and intention. That's a big technical problem. We'll succeed at solving the capability problem before we succeed at solving the safety and alignment problem. And that's what we've heard the majority say, is that we have the capability to develop the technology, but we haven't figured out the other sides of it. We have not figured out the safety side, the alignment side. Most researchers agree that super intelligent AI is unlikely to exhibit human emotions like love or hate. But then there's no reason to expect AI to become benevolent or understand human thought and human capabilities. The AI could be programmed to do something devastating. Autonomous weapons are artificial intelligence systems that are programmed to kill. In the hands of the wrong persons, these weapons could easily cause mass casualties. Moreover, an AI arms race could inadvertently lead us to an AI war that results in the wipeouts of whole parts of society. To be part of what the programming is to be avoid being thwarted by the enemies. These could be designed to be extremely difficult to turn off, so humans could lose control of the situation. We saw that in the movie 2001 with HAL, where it had to be turned off, and it was difficult to turn it off. You had to go in and take it apart. This risk is one that's one's presence, even with narrow AI, grows at all levels of AI intelligence, and as the autonomy of AI increases, as it begins to be able to do more and more things on itself and learns on itself, our ability to manipulate it and control it is increasingly getting more difficulty. AI is programmed to do something beneficial, but then it develops a destructive method for achieving its goal. We can see this happen. You might be able to get there faster, but getting there, you're hurt in the process. If a super intelligence system is tasked with an ambitious geoengineering project, it might wreak havoc with our ecosystem as a side effect. and view human attempts to stop it as a threat that needs to be met, as a threat that needs to be neutralized. You know, we've seen these in the science fiction movies for years and years, but often science fiction can become science fact if we are not careful with what we're doing. In the long term, an important question is what happens if the quest for strong AI, a super intelligent AI, succeeds and an AI system becomes better than humans at all kinds of tasks? You know, Arthur Good in 1965 designed smarter AI systems that is itself a cognitive task. It could undergo recursive self-improvements, triggering an intelligent explosion, leaving human intellect far, far behind. And by inventing this new technology, super intelligence might help us eradicate war, disease, poverty. On the other hand, it might help us eliminate humankind because humankind cannot be accurately predicted. It has its own ways of us acting innovative, of us doing things which are not the A1 + 1 = 2 type of equation. And a super intelligent AI might be there. You know, Princeton computer science Rakasi said that if you look at AI, it's going to go well beyond gender and race. In addition to its data and algorithm bias, AI is developed by humans, and humans are inherently biased. And you know, we're working to get that. One of the Google researchers on their project, Tennant Gilbert, says the root of bias is social rather than technology. And she called scientists like yourself who are developing these AI systems some of the most dangerous people in the world, because we have this illusion of objectivity, but we cannot have it, and we're putting that into our AI systems. I would like to close with another quote. It is not from a scientist. It is not from a technology leader, but it was at a recent event. And to me, involvement at this level underscores our risk if we do not take the steps to manage this. Pope Francis, at a last September Vatican meeting entitled The Common Good in the Digital Age, Pope Francis warned that AI has the ability to circulate opinions and false data that could poison public debate and even manipulate the opinions of millions of people to the point of endangering the very institutions that guarantee peaceful civil coexistence. If mankind's so-called technology progress was to become the enemy of the common good, this would lead to an unfortunate regression to a form of barbarism dictated by the laws of the strongest. You know, for even a pope to come back and put this strong of a warning out about the dangers of really the next forms of artificial intelligence, to me, is telling part of what very learned scientists, very learned engineers, very learned businessmen have said. And if this House believes that AI is the best thing to ever happen to humanity, we have to begin to understand. Like I said in the open remarks, it's a tool, but it's a tool that has to be heavily regulated as we go from narrow AI to the next forms of AI. And our position is even though the majority is trying to push this as rapidly as they can, and that it is the best thing. It's one of our tools that we should use, but it's one that we have to be extremely careful with, and it has to become extremely regulated as it goes through its next evolutions. So thank you so much for allowing us the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Now I request Professor Rob for rebuttal and closing remarks. You also get 7 + 2, 9 minutes for your speech.
Thank you. And thank you to the loyal opposition for basically making my argument for me. It all hinges, as I started, on the word likely. And we all use nuclear energy as an example. Is nuclear energy good or bad? I think we can argue overall now it's good. Though with the changes that just occurred in Russia and Ukraine, with now the threat of nuclear weapons being used or the threat of the failure of a nuclear power plant in another Chernobyl, we might argue that next week that it is bad. Our goal as a government is to assure that the answer to any question having to do with a technology that can alter the world and affect the lives of our constituents is to assure that the answer is it will be good. And with AI, the focus has to be on making sure that AI is implemented properly. There were some interesting comments going back. I'd like to hit on something that Don said earlier with regard to, and it was a good argument, is because if you look at likely to be best, of bringing up something that could be better, and he identified vaccines. Aren't vaccines better? But as Don likely knows, AIs were used pretty heavily in the development of the vaccines. They were used more heavily in the development of medications to mitigate the symptoms. And the effort now to create a mechanism that will create a vaccine in days as opposed to months or years is largely based on analytics and eventual AI use, showcasing that AIs, at least going forward with regard to pandemics, are being focused on the good side of the equation. They didn't bring up the research that Russia's been doing in AI weaponry, and given that works against me, I probably shouldn't either. But it points to the overall problem that we have with any technology, and that is the tendency to use it to do harm before we convert it to use for good. And we saw that with nuclear energy. The first time most of us saw nuclear energy used was when it was blowing something up. Of the nuclear energy plants showed up much later. Well, we don't want the same thing to happen with AI. Both sides agree that AI is coming. We're a small country. We aren't going to be able to stop it. Our effort has to be to control it, to assure a positive outcome for our people, to assure the fact that it's likely to be beneficial, as opposed to stand back and let whatever happens and say, hey, it's not our fault. I think the opposition was arguing along that line, and I think it's unfortunate. With any kind of a problem, you need to be able to anticipate the problem, put in place a plan to mitigate the negative sides of the problem, and if possible, use the event for the benefit of the country and our people. What we're proposing is that latter path. AI can be good or bad. The opposition likes to use science fiction a great deal to make their points, and recognize that science fiction, to a large extent, is fantasy. Just because we have a movie called The Matrix doesn't mean robots are going to rise up, turn people into generating units, and take over the world. However, there is a use for science fiction. It's called science fiction prototyping. It's used by the U.S. DARPA, their research and development for weapons, both offensive and defensive. And it's used to simulate what will happen in the future. And what happens is science fiction authors get together in a pool and they analyze what's going on in the world, and they come up with possible solutions using their mind largely to anticipate that future world and what would be needed to mitigate the problems of that future. So science fiction does have a play here, but it can be used, and it is being used to make sure that the world transitions into a more positive place where AI is being used for our benefit. I mentioned that AI can be used to develop viruses much more quickly. AIs can not only be used to make more intelligent weapons, they can be used to make more intelligent defenses for weapons. Both Google and Lifeboat Foundation have created AI shield concepts where AIs are being developed specifically to go after and shield against hostile AIs. Perhaps the best defense against a bad AI is a good AI. But if nobody develops the good AI and we wait till the bad AI does us harm, we may not be able to develop the good AI and assure the positive outcome. What we're suggesting is we put our efforts on that side. We make sure that our development and research is predominantly focused on making sure that AIs are used for the benefit of our people. In the medical field, or talking about federated data so that the AIs can get the information they need to make the decisions they need to make without violating the privacy of our citizens. It's not difficult. It's not a hard concept. There was a lot of talk about AIs having personalities and emotions. I'm not convinced that's the way we should go. Having an AI that got angry would be problematic if I'm driving through town and it's pissed at me and controlling the stoplights. It would be very bad for me individually, and probably very bad for everybody that the AI was at that moment controlling. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. We need to make sure that AIs continue to make decisions based not on emotions, but based on facts, based on data. In politics, data is kind of a funny word. We tend to convert data to whatever it is we want it to be. And that's bad. I mean, at the end of the day, that's bad. In fact, we're watching that happen in Russia, where it looks like they put out a lot of bad data on purpose, propaganda, and then they believed that propaganda and acted on it, and that was catastrophic for the country. We need to make sure, regardless of what party's in power, we don't believe our bullshit. We need to be able to make sure that we're making decisions on the data, not making decisions on the bad information we may be generating. In fact, I would argue that going forward, both parties should work harder to operate on the facts and not operate on opinions and emotions. A lot of discussion on social scientists, but the most interesting thing, I think, and by the way, social science is an excellent way to look at this, because these AIs have to interact with humans, and if we don't understand how they interact with humans, we'll never be able to come up with a way to assure the positive impact of AI. So Donald is absolutely correct that right now we lack the element of social engineering that we need to assure that AI's impact on our societies are positive. What we're recommending is we fix that. In other words, our efforts are always focused on assuring that AIs are positive. So rather than perhaps developing better AI offensive weapons, in weapons research, we develop better AI defensive weapons. Rather than using AIs to develop viruses, we use AIs to develop antiviruses. Rather than using AIs to make pharmaceutical companies wealthier, we use AIs to reduce the cost of pharmaceuticals and make them more affordable for our citizens. There was a comment on narrow, broad, and general AI that I want to clarify. Right now, the industry is at narrow AI, which means we develop an AI for a specific purpose, and it's only really good for that purpose. And the problem with narrow AI is economically it's non-viable. You can't spread it. If you're building a custom AI for every purpose, the cost of every AI is extremely high. In fact, that was one of the problems with IBM's Watson. It wasn't that Watson didn't work. It was that the cost of training Watson was so high that most people couldn't afford it. We're now moving to broad AI, and what's driving the move to broad AI is autonomous vehicles to a large extent. The computers that are being developed for autonomous vehicles can also be used for robotics. They can also be used for analytical tools. They can be used for security. That's broad AI, and that means you can develop a particular AI platform, and then the total available market for that platform is larger, and therefore it can be made cheaper. If we use a narrow AI for cars, nobody could afford the cars. With broad AIs, you can make it cheap enough so that people can afford them in the automobiles. And then general AI means that you develop an AI and it can be used for most of anything. It's not that it's going to be playing a game while it's doing manufacturing. It's that you use an AI and you can put it in the cloud and it can play games. And that same AI structure can then be used and reprogrammed and used in the manufacturing line. That means you can make a lot of AIs the same, get huge economies of scale. They get a lot cheaper. So it really narrow, broad, and general really speaks to the cost of the AI and the ability to implement it. But if we get to broad AI and we don't have rules, structure, and capabilities defined around it, that broad AI could do really ugly things to us at scale. So once again, it goes back to how we started this. We want to assure that AI is likely to be beneficial to society because, as the opposition points out, if we don't, it will be unlikely to benefit society and will do us a great deal of harm. We propose that we put our efforts into assuring the outcome of AI and making sure that AI will benefit society, therefore making my statement true that AI, this House holds that AI is likely to be beneficial to society.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister of this Parliament. Today's debate, really great debate. And we learned a lot of things about the benefit of AI and a lot of challenges happening around the world. And this is our objective. Thesis and antithesis actually develop the synthesis. So this is the part of our debate. From the government side, they bring very good arguments like in favor of AI. From the opposition side, they are trying to very interesting points that what is the future of AI and how it will be challenging for our society. We also believe as a World Talent Economy Forum that we need to develop our modern science, engineering, and technology. Definitely, we have to use all of the things for human development. And beside that, next week we will arrange some like an open dialogue and debate on this wire, because definitely World Talent Economy Forum against any kind of wire around the world, and especially it's create a huge impact in the human minds, even in the mosque, small mosque I visit in Malaysia, and I find even many people actually pray for Ukraine. That is the impact, and that is the way actually our leaders has to understand that how actually like this kind of work create impact. So definitely we want to work for the global peace. We already collaborating with millions of people, not only in Malaysia. We are collaborating with university, school, college, government, corporations, mosque, and many interesting places we are collaborating. And our major objective, we want to develop human resources, and definitely with the help of modern science, engineering, and technology. That's why we are providing a lot of scholarship to the students for publishing their research papers, as well as I believe our today's debaters in the mock parliaments, they are a very good debater, and this is actually example for our youth communities that how to do debate, how to organize the thoughts, how to go for better analysis. And this is the way I think our youth people can train themselves. And I believe our speakers also happy to support the youth community in the developing world. So we are taking very good initiative, we are making a good plans, and hopefully we can provide more solutions to the developing nations people. So thank you for today's debate, Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald, Mr. Marshalls. Excellent debate. Trust me, many people they say that this kind of people we want to see in the parliaments, this kind of people we want to this kind of debate we want to see. Many youth communities, our students, our people, they are really happy with your debate, and I believe through this process you can change human life. At least you are sharing your knowledge, sharing your views. This is very important for us. Thank you, Professor Rob, Professor David Smith, Professor Donalds, Mr. Marshall, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your people. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.